we're going to have Dr. Hilary Kalmbach, who's lecturer in Middle Eastern History at the University of Sussex. And obviously, what I'm going to talk about is one individual, my path to an academic career. You know, there's no one way to get an academic career. There's also no guarantee of success, and I know that, at least for me, the uncertainty was quite difficult. I think once you've gotten past the postdoc stage, it's easy to kind of romanticize the graduate student process and the postdoc time, and actually forget how much time you put into applying for jobs, or how actually stressful the uncertainty about what's going to happen at the end of the postdoc or what's going to happen at the end of the degree is. I still remember, don't worry. But I'm going to try to tell you a bit more about what worked for me, interspersed with some more general ideas in the hopes that this might be useful for you. I think so far we've had quite a few presentations at this workshop about doing extra things: impact, outreach, networking, social media. And I think my experience has shown that yes, it's a really good idea to do extra things above and beyond your PhD or your doctorate. But you can't do everything at once. And I think it's really important to try to have a plan, develop some sort of plan for what to do. As Ian said yesterday, it's ideal to try to find ways to relate impact and other activities to your research. Because theoretically that's what you're passionate about. As Ian was saying yesterday, he was talking about becoming known known as an expert in one particular area first, and I think that's an excellent idea. I think that to take that a little bit further, ideally, what you do, your whole plan, research, and these other activities fit into a narrative about who you are as a researcher and what you want to be known as an expert on. And obviously I'm mainly talking about academic careers, but the same sort of thing would apply if you're trying to go into some other sort of career. You have to have a coherent narrative about where you've come from and where you want to go that kind of weaves everything together. But I've said, okay, you need a plan, you need a narrative, but you also should go with the flow. Sometimes things happen and you take advantage of them, and then it all just kind of falls into place later. So don't worry about having it all worked out now. Take advantage of serendipitous things. So what's my narrative? What do I tell people about who I am? So I say, and this is right off my website, I'm an expert on Islam and its interaction with modern Middle Eastern cultures and societies over the past 200 years. Major themes in my research are authority, knowledge, education, and gender. I look at how Islam and its traditions have been reinvented to fit into or advance reform projects. And my work combines approaches from area studies, history, and digital humanities. That's the spiel in a nutshell. How did I get there? Okay, well, I started off with an ethnographic MA. I looked at Islamic authority. And I applied for the BRISMES article prize. That was the first time I'd really kind of gotten to know BRISMES. And I won the first graduate article prize. Definitely apply to the BRISMES graduate article prize after you join BRISMES. It's if you can't win unless you apply. This helped me get known with respect to work on Islamic authority, and especially female Islamic authority, which at the time very few people were working on. And this also kind of happened serendipitously, but I'll skip exactly how that happened. For the doctorate, I knew I wanted to switch to a more historical approach. But at the time, it wasn't immediately apparent how well I could weave the historical approach in the doctorate, which was a history of a particular school, in with this narrative of, okay, I also look at Islamic authority. But actually, once I got into it, I have continued to use my historical material not only for the doctorate project, but also to keep working on Islamic authority and keep going to conferences and publishing on that. So I'm likely to kind of try to further unite the two in whatever I do next. So it's one of those things where the narrative has gotten, I think, more coherent as time's gone on. It's kind of developed. I've kind of gone with the flow. Two examples. So one of my things, the main point of gist of this is that you need to do extra things and you need to be strategic about the extra things that you do. So two examples of extra things that I think made me stand out at particular points, key points in my career. First was organizing a conference that produced an edited volume. So essentially, I wanted to take my master's project on Islamic authority further, but it wasn't going to be my doctorate because I wanted to do a historical doctorate. But when I was talking to people about the doctorate and about the Islamic authority, everyone only wanted to really talk to me about Islamic authority and female Islamic authority. So I kind of took that, and I was still interested in it too. So I decided to put together a publication-driven workshop. So this was a workshop that was closed. Everyone submitted the papers before the workshop. We mainly actually discussed the papers because you're supposed to read them for the workshop. Essentially, we started off one day, then the colleague and I who were organizing it issued a CFP. We got a massive response, 2 days, giant volume, ended up being a massive success. Now, in terms of whether this is a good thing for me to be doing, I got very mixed advice from this. So my supervisor was very supportive because he knew it would make me stand out on the job market, and this was very key. I could not have done this project or put time into this project if I didn't have the support of my supervisor, because when I needed extensions from the university because it was taking more time to finish my doctorate, he was the one who was signing off on those extensions. So that was very, very important. Another advisor whose advice I trust, really have a lot of trust in, was less encouraging. He thought it would distract from what I was doing and that I really should just focus on finishing the doctorate. The university certainly wasn't happy because it lengthened my time to completion. But in the end, I ended up following this, and it worked out. Luckily, I wasn't funded by a research council, so I didn't have to worry about finishing within 3 years or 3 to 4 years. I ended up taking 5, I think, but that's a long story. The points, anyway, I did have some funding already, so that it was taking me a little longer wasn't too much of a problem. And I was able to get a part-time job to kind of cover things to the end for the last 2 years of the doctorate. And I think that, of course, it's difficult to know, but I think that the topic of it and then the success of it was probably a factor in me getting a postdoc before I finished the doctorate. And it was also actually ironically linked to the part-time job as well. And then this helped me, once I had the postdoc, I knew I could take the time to finish the volume. So it kind of all came together. But at the outset of this project, I didn't know that it was going to come together so fortuitously. I was just kind of basically following my interests. And I knew that I wanted to keep going on this topic, and this seemed the best way to do it. The second kind of example of an extra thing that I ended up doing, actually pretty much entirely by chance, but has, I think, played a pretty significant role in helping me get to where I am today, or really making me stand out a little bit more than other applicants to jobs, was joining the BRISMES Council. And this literally just happened when, first of all, I put myself out there, and second of all, I kind of went with the flow when opportunities presented themselves. So in late 2010, I wanted to go to the BRISMES conference the next spring, and the call for papers had something about applying for research networks, through research networks, which were at that point run by the British Academy. And when I got in touch with the leader of the Faith, Politics, and Society network, I was told that it had just shut down because she was standing down and no one wanted to take her place. And it ended up, essentially I was asked to apply for it, and essentially you couldn't be a postgraduate, you had to have a position at a UK university, and I just started this postdoc. So I was eligible to lead it, but I wasn't super overburdened as a young lecturer, which is once you get a lectureship, you don't have, you you don't think about taking on other activities. And then because of that, I was co-opted onto the BRISMES Council. And I've just kind of gone with it. I've shown up to council meetings, I've gone to events. Of course, there also happen to be more senior academics on council who are very supportive of me being involved in what's going on. But I think that combined with being refable, so having this journal article, having the article prize, having the volume, all those things combined really helped me stand out when I was applying for jobs, especially at University of Sussex, which is an institution that was trying to build a program in Middle Eastern, North African, and Israeli studies. So really coming out and basically having ties within the wider disciplinary community, as well as being an excellent researcher, was, I think, was probably a factor. And then on top of that, once I was at Sussex, I ended up running the BRISMES conference 2 years ago, which was incredibly time-consuming. Not a great idea the first year in an academic job, but that's just the way it happened. But it was very appreciated by the council, and the community building work that I did for that within Sussex, bringing together people all across the university in different schools to do this incredibly time-intensive thing, set me up to be the first director of the Middle East and North Africa Center at Sussex, which I hope will continue to work with BRISMES and MESNET and all of this stuff, and really help contribute to developing the community of graduate students, I hope. Kind of give back, I suppose, to the community, I hope. So that's my second example. So my 3 points are, 1, you can't do everything, so you need to have a plan for these extra activities. 2, make sure these extra activities are research plus. They can't take they cannot take the place of your research. Ultimately, you won't get hired or kept on or promoted on any of these extra activities. You get hired, promoted, retained, etc. on your research. But you can stand out on the job market if you have these extra things on top of your research. So if you're going to make this work for you, you need to think about how can you link these extra activities into things that you're passionate about, i.e. your research, hopefully you're passionate about it. And 2, how do these extra things fit into a narrative about who you are as a researcher, where you want to go, and in what kind of fields and areas do you want to be known. And I think, as Ian was saying, start small. Like my initial one was, Islamic Authority, basically. So those are my 3 main points. My other suggestion, kind of for how to potentially do this, is to try to develop good habits now for a lot of these things, because believe it or not, as hard as graduate school seems, it only gets harder to kind of balance research and all of these other things, because your responsibilities only increase. So my top 5 tips for good habits that you should develop now that will serve you well as you go forward are, number 1, get into a routine for doing deep focus work, i.e. Reading, research, really the sort of work that everyone procrastinates on. You graduate students, everyone else, because it's hard. It takes a lot of energy, and but the key, if you can get into a habit of putting in, what's your routine for starting to do, your deep focus work. Do you make a cup of tea? Do you put a sign on your door saying, "Don't come in, I'm doing my research"? You figure out, do you turn on a particular song? Do you sit in a particular place? Figure out whatever it is that helps you kind of get in the zone that you do in the 5 minutes or the 10 minutes before you sit down to do research. If you can get in the habit of doing that now, it will be much easier when you're further down the line and you have other responsibilities to kind of switch it on, because throughout all of this, you need to be keeping up your research. And I think that the more responsibilities pile on, and if you don't have one of these routines, it's easy to procrastinate, it's easy to be kind of responsive or passive, responding to what people want from you, as opposed to being proactive and making sure that the majority of your time, or as much of your time as possible, is going into the things that are most important to you. So that's tip number one. Just get in the habit of figuring out whatever you need to do to get in deep focused time, basically research time on a regular basis, research writing, think the hard stuff. Number one, figure out whatever you need to do to just make that as easy as possible. Number two is figure out some sort of productivity management system that works for you without, procrastinating too much about it. So there's getting things done. There's all sorts of different systems for managing, basically processing to-dos and tasks and then actually getting them done. One of the, everyone is going to have a different preference for this sort of thing. One of the people whose blogs I've found especially useful recently is a guy called Cal Newport, and he's this person who I borrowed this term deep focus for. And I find him useful among productivity writers because he's someone who is an academic and who actually, he's a mathematician, not a humanities person, but he has to spend a lot of time sitting proving theorems and really doing this kind of deep focused knowledge work. And so he on the one hand, he's engaging with this kind of productivity, getting things done discourse that is really essential for managing all of these other things that you have to do, being a good colleague, not dropping balls, all of this stuff. But he also recognizes that for academics and other knowledge workers, as he calls them, that you need to balance this with the habits that are necessary to kind of do that sort of work too. And that was something that I personally was finding missing or lacking in a lot of the kind of productivity discussion that goes on the web. So Cal Newport is my current favorite person to look to. Number three is to cultivate a range of advisors and mentors. So your supervisor is obviously going to be a main one, but other academics at your institution, people who you like, who you admire. And when you get to these turning points, when you're developing this plan, for all this extra work, ask them for advice. Ask them what they think, and consider what they say. That's number three. Number four is get yourself out there. So you're all already doing very well at this because you're here, you're presenting, attending. Attend or present at conferences. Major ones, smaller. So there are major ones like BRISMES, MESA, that sort of thing. There are also smaller ones that are more just topic focused, and you can often find out about them on mailing lists, on Facebook groups, etc. Another suggestion, you can join BRISMES, you can get active in the graduate section, obviously get active in MESNet. In BRISMES, there are also research networks where graduate student members are very, very welcome. There's the one that I run, Faith, Politics, and Society. Another one, Critical Middle Eastern Studies. And remind me what the third one is, I meant to look it up. I always forget.
Violence and resistance.
Okay, yes, it's more kind of a little bit more, so Faith, Politics, and Society is a little bit more humanities with some social science thrown in, whereas this other, I think they look at religion as well. Anyway, they do a little bit more politics IR.
Certainly social science.
Social sciences, a little bit more social sciences. Now, one concern that I think a lot of graduate students and young academics have is potentially a concern about sharing your work too early, but well before you're ready to publish it, and basically having people borrow your ideas. And of course, this is always a risk. But I don't know, I'm not really taking that approach. I've presented early and often. I've been really generous with sources, I hope. I've tried to be very generous with sources, ideas. For instance, when I've had something that I'm using in my research, but I can see that it would benefit another colleague who would then use it for something completely different, I've shared. And I think that when you approach things with kind of a win-win attitude and a generosity, essentially trying to give to the people around you, most of the time you not only feel quite good about things, but you also get a lot back. Of course there is always the risk of negative consequences, and of course it is out there, but I personally think the benefits of being generous and kind of getting out there and networking, putting yourself out there, but also being I think they really outweigh the negatives. I certainly haven't, tried to be very closed about that. And then finally, number 5 is kind of an expansion of network and expansion of number 4, which is networking and networking maintenance. Basically, figure out what habits you need to do to maintain your networks and kind of keep them up. Ideally with a minimal amount of emotional or intellectual energy kind of noise. It's really easy to just think, oh, well, I'm Facebook and Twitter and this and that, and all of a sudden that's taking up so much of your, what do they say, bandwidth, your attention, taking up so much energy that you don't have time to think about these other things. So you basically, if you can figure out a way to kind of do what you need to do the minimum with the kind of a small, manageable chunk of time, that will help you essentially get in the habit of doing that now. That will help you in the future. So that's pretty much all I was planning on saying, which probably is good because I think time is flying. But I wanted to say one more thing. And I don't usually talk about this. I'm certainly not going to go into any detail about this. But I think it is worth saying. The academic world, just like the world in general, is gendered. And that was not apparent to me for a long time. I was blissfully ignorant of the details of how the professional world and the academic world is gendered, which is great. But once you kind of get out in the job market, kind of the more you get yourself out there, if you haven't seen it yet, ladies, women, you will see it at some point. And so my advice to the women would be, know it's out there. Let it, for me, when I've had these situations, I kind of realized how things are. It's actually only really made me appreciate even more the senior men, or senior officials, senior men, senior academics that I've been working with for so long who don't see me in terms of my gender. Basically, it makes me really value and cherish the time and advice and energy they've put into developing me. I appreciate them more because I see that not everybody is like them. The other thing is, number 3 is that third little bit of advice is that try to find some way of learning how to deal with the people who aren't like that. And getting advice from senior female colleagues can be really helpful, or just even observing how senior female colleagues deal with these people that once you discover who's problematic, you just see how other women deal with them. Would be my suggestion. Now, as to the men, I would suggest that you be aware that many of your female peers, female colleagues, they may be perceived differently than you. They may face different challenges than you. And just to try to be aware of that and try to be sensitive to that. You might not see it, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. So try to do your best to be aware, sympathetic, understanding. And try your best to be part of the solution, not the problem. And that might seem like an obvious thing to all of you, but actually making it happen in practice can be trickier, will be trickier than you might think. I would suggest trying as much as possible to be reflexive, self-reflexive. Think about what you do, how it impacts others, and just think back on what's happening and be willing to see things from other people's perspectives. And also when you can, stand up and be an advocate and an ally for women who are going through these issues. For instance, several years ago, at the suggestion of a male BRISMES officer, BRISMES signed on to a pledge to promote, or basically further as much as possible, gender equity in keynotes and basically high-profile conference engagements. And that's something that as a man you can come on board with and be an ally for quite visibly. But please don't just invite women to speak about gender. I mean, obviously that is something that we like to talk about, but we do talk about more than that. And then finally, potentially consider how you can integrate gender and gender concerns into your own work so that it becomes more a part of mainstream discourse as opposed to something different that just women and one or two men do. Obviously that's not, but essentially I think that ideally there would be space for stuff that's specific just to gender and studying men and women and their relations, but also concerns that have been raised successfully in that forum would be more often integrated into the mainstream discourse in other disciplines. So, potentially when you have the opportunity, think about how to do that. So there goes the little addendum. I don't usually talk about gender. I don't really like talking about gender, but I think that in this sort of forum, it would be, as a woman sitting here, it would be weird of me not to mention it, given that it is an issue. So, thank you.